Nikolai left with many of the men. A few guards remained behind with Gideon to make sure his clothes were appropriate for the climate. Gideon stalled by insisting he needed food. "I feel a bit faint," placing a hand to his forehead in dramatic fashion. They ordered a meal of borscht for him. He enjoyed playing the role of the academic fop, but once the meal was over, the men tied his hands in front of him, leaving the bands on. As they pushed him out of the room, Gideon raised his arms up. "Is there any way we can make these just a tad more comfortable? I'm afraid I have very delicate skin, which is getting all scratched up by this very, very coarse rope. You don't happen to have silk, do you?" The men shoved him forward. Gideon ignored their roughness and carried on trying to distract them. Silk," he said nostalgically. "Well, I suppose you two aren't that adventurous. But trust me, silk rope is an excellent investment. It doesn't chafe." The two guards shoved Gideon again to make him move, but Gideon stopped. "I rather like silk rope. You'll be surprised at what you can do with it. But this rope is so scratchy." "Well, if you don't have silk, then can you take off these bracelets? They pinch against the rope. See?" He shoved his wrists into the face of the guard as they maneuvered him out of the tavern and onto the street. "They're all pink, and aren't they just ghastly? Way too girly for me. I mean, I like my clothes pink and such, but that doesn't mean I don't like women. Remember the silk ropes?" He wiggled his eyebrows suggestively, but the two guards were not interested. "I suppose pink skin is a little kinky, but I was never into it. Ropes can be fun, but pain was never my thing." Gideon sighed as the guards were oblivious to his suggestion. It would seem he would have to find another way to achieve his freedom. Shoved out of the tavern, Hara swore at the men and ducked when they threw her glider at her. It clattered on the cobblestones of the alleyway. Hara picked it up to see if they had damaged it. Left alone in the empty alley, the door to the tavern shut. Satisfied she had convinced them that no matter their desire for her, she would be more trouble than pleasure. Hara ran her hands over the wooden sides of the glider case. Placated, it was still in good shape except for the scratches on the side. A door opened further down the alleyway and two men shoved another man out. With his hands tied in front of him, he stumbled and regained his balance. The imprisoned man turned to the others. "Hey, I'm delicate here. There's no need to be so shovey and pushy. Remember, I'm just a professor. I don't have a weapon. I'm not going to hurt you, so you don't have to be so violent. And with all this movement, I really don't want to see my dinner again. No matter how lovely it was." He attempted to smooth his hair away from his face, but with his hands tied together, it was an awkward action. Dressed in an oversized fur coat with a tweed jacket showing underneath, he certainly didn't fit in with the Roshian commoners who held him captive. The Roshians, armed to the teeth, though being armed was not surprising in a smuggler's port, exuded menace. Hara hesitated. She hated fops. Less than useless, she thought. She needed to find a way out of the town and find a permanent berth. She didn't need to get into fights with random Roshians. Sighing, because she knew it really didn't matter. Hara couldn't leave a person in trouble. Trouble and her were close enough that she wondered some days whether it was hereditary to seek him out. Hara called out, "Hey, I don't think the toff wants to go with you guys." All of them turned. The prisoner motioned with his tied hands to shoo her away. "That is awfully sweet of you to say that, but these guys aren't about to play nice. I wouldn't want you to get hurt or anything. As long as they remember I'm delicate, I'll be fine. Especially if they remember to use silk rope next time." He grinned as if it was merely a game of sorts and he wasn't being kept prisoner. At least he was a decent guy. That made it almost a good idea to help him. Almost. She approached, dropping her glider to the ground to help with her agility. One of the Roshian men said, "Get lost, Malenkaya Divochka. This is not your problem." Hara replied in Rosh, "I'm afraid I have the bad habit of making things my problem." One of the Roshian men held the prisoner so he wouldn't escape, and the other pulled out a large Barker iron. There were more sophisticated weapons on the market, but it was big enough to put a pretty large hole in her. The Barkers were a favorite of Roshian revolutionaries, to the point that the revolutionaries were called Roshbarkers after their weapon of choice. Hara took another step closer. "If you let him go, no one has to be hurt." The two Roshian men looked at each other in confusion. The one with the gun turned to her. "You do realize there are two of us and only one of you?" Hara grinned with her hands spread out to appear harmless. "I know. It doesn't seem fair, does it? Maybe if I tie one of my hands behind my back, it might even the odds." She took another step forward and the men threatened but remained inactive. Maybe going around as a girl without a disguise was a good idea. If she had been dressed as a boy, she would have been attacked already. Hara waved her hands as she spoke. "I mean, you can't even call for help. This alleyway is completely deserted. I doubt the people in the tavern will even rouse if they hear a minor scuffle out here." She used the waving of her hands to disguise her movement and took the final step she needed to get close enough to the gun-waving Roshian. Haram moved fast. Setting her feet apart for stability, she knocked his gun aside and stepped into his guard. She pulled her arm back and slammed the ball of her palm into the man's throat. He doubled over and she helped him over a little further into her knee. He grunted and slumped to the ground, unconscious. The other Roshian fumbled for his gun, but his prisoner saw the opportunity for escape and struggled against his hold. Hara grabbed the Roshian's gun. She slammed the metal handle into the man's face and knocked him out. Now she had dealt with the Roshians. She turned back down the alley and picked up her glider, still in its box. The fop followed her. "Thank you. The rescue, I mean." He waved with his tied hands to indicate the alleyway and the downed men. Hara shrugged. "You don't happen to have a spare airship available?" He shook his head. "I'm looking for one myself, though. We can look for one together." Hara picked up her pace. "That's nice for you. But I think it might be better if we are on our own." She certainly would be better off without a fop following her around. She headed out of the alley and down the street. The fop followed. He worked the knots out of his restraints with his teeth as he skipped to keep up with her. Hara considered the airships floating above the town. She might not get a job on one of them, but she knew enough about airships to stow away. And she needed to get out of town before the men she had knocked out woke and informed the others. Only an idiot would make enemies of the Roshbarkers and stick around to see what they would do about it. Hara picked up her pace, but the fop managed to keep up with her. She bet he would still keep up with her, even if she sprinted. She stopped at the wooden palisades which marked out the boundary around the port, indicated by large rocks with metal pins lined up in a row indicated the anchors for the airships. Men milled around. Some lounged on stools at the base of their ships or on the decks of their ships. Large wooden crates piled up around the edge of the port, ready to be loaded by steam-powered lifts. Porters lugged crates to them, which then rose sluggishly to the awaiting airships. Hara moved behind the crates and crouched. Peeking over the top, she analyzed the different ships. 5 ships floated above the large field. A sleek runner drifted near them. It wouldn't have a large cargo hold, but it would be fast. It was an armed ship with large guns mounted on the sides, which loomed and cast a shadow over the crates she hid behind. Most likely a pirate, rather than a smuggler. A little more dangerous, even for this town. The sleeping guard leaned back in his chair, but she dismissed the ship as too much trouble. If discovered on it, she would be killed rather than dumped overboard at a low altitude or over water. Though a beautiful ship, she'd pick another ride to avoid trouble. The fop flopped next to her. "You're very agile. I could hardly keep up with you." "I like that." Hara glared at him. "That was the point. I told you I thought we should split up." The fop, oblivious to the bite in her tone. He popped his head up over the crates, then back down just as quickly. He asked, "Which one are you going for?" Hara peered over the top of the crates again. The distracted guard lounged by a large-bellied hopper. Made for brief trips with a large cargo area, good for smuggling along the border. The guard flirted with a girl, enticing her to spend some time with him. It would be a simple task to sneak past him and climb the ladder hanging from the deck of the ship. Hara prepared to move for the hopper when a commotion at the gate of the port made her glance that way. Several Roshbarkers pushed their way past people. She swore and ducked down again. She turned to the fop. "You just made things very difficult." He glanced over the top. Those men again. I'm afraid they chased all the girls away as well." Hara hoped he wasn't right when she looked over the crates again. The sweet-talking guard pulled out his gun while the girl disappeared. She swore. "The guy over there is still asleep," said the fop, as he gazed over at the sleek runner. "He sure does have a pretty ship. Almost as pretty as you are." He flashed her a grin but didn't expect anything from his flirting, as he was already looking at the ship again. The sleek runner would be a possibility, except the Roshbarkers would see them going for it before they could complete the climb. They wouldn't be able to hide away until the ship left on its own, like she had wanted to do before. Besides, the runner was still a pirate, and the crew wouldn't be very forgiving.